Hi, I'm Full Offense, and I need an intro. Hi, I'm Full Offense. Welcome to my channel. Today, I want to talk about two very similar Genshin Impact characters, the mysterious Kaeya and the cold-hearted Rosaria. Before we jump into the guide, be sure to like this video and leave a comment too. Liking and commenting helps my videos get pushed into the YouTube algorithm. It helps my channel out and it would really mean a lot to me. Quick disclaimer, I'm covering two characters and three different playstyles. There are a lot of different variables to cover in this video, and I try to cover as many of them as I can. In regards to artifacts, both Kaeya and Rosaria use the same artifacts in the same situations. The first artifact set is the Blizzard Strayer Forest set. It's used if you're using either of them as a main DPS in a freeze team. It gives them a free 40% crit rate when attacking frozen targets. The next situation would be if you're running either of them as a main DPS for a non-freeze team. It's up to personal preference here, but you could run a split set composed of the Gladiators Finale 2 set and the Blizzard Strayer 2 set, or you can run the full Gladiators Finale 4 set. Next, we have the Noblesse Oblige 4 set, which is the preferred set when using either of these characters as sub-DPS. Additionally, if you already have a character on your team with the Noblesse Oblige 4 set, you could run a split set with the Noblesse Oblige 2 set and the Blizzard Strayer 2 set. Also, at the time of me uploading this, Inazuma isn't out yet, but the trailer is. The Emblem of Severed Fate 4 set sounds like it could be an upgrade over the Noblesse Oblige and Blizzard Strayer split set. You would only need to exceed 140% energy recharge for the Emblem of Severed Fate set to give your elemental burst more damage. Each playstyle has a bit of a different stat priority. For freeze teams, you won't need much crit rate because you have so much built in. Crit damage is going to be your number one stat here, and you can get a lot of it. With good artifacts, you can even exceed 200% crit damage. Next, you'll need energy recharge to maintain your burst, and then you'll want attack percent and flat attack. Also, if you're using Kaeya in a freeze team and you don't have his first constellation, you'll need to pick up about 15% crit rate. If you were to run them as main DPS in melt teams, you'll need crit rate again, and it will be your top priority. Try to aim for 70% on Kaeya and 60% on Rosaria. Then we have crit damage to match it, and as usual, you should aim for 100 to 140%. Since it's a reverse melt comp, we have Elemental Mastery for bigger hits, and then we have Energy Recharge for burst uptime. Sub-DPS stats are a bit different because in this role, Kaeya needs more energy recharge than Rosaria. Kaeya will want energy recharge above any other stat. Then he'll want crit rate and crit damage to the usual 1:2 ratio. Lastly, he'll want attack percent and elemental mastery. Rosaria doesn't need as much energy recharge or crit rate as Kaeya does for the sub-DPS role, but crit rate is still her top priority, up to 50 to 60%. Next is elemental mastery, but only if you're triggering reverse melts on her, otherwise skip this. Then she'll want energy recharge for her burst uptime, and after that she'll want crit damage. Lastly, she'll want attack percent. Note that if Rosaria has over 50% crit rate before using her elemental skill, then her second ascension talent will be able to grant at least a 10% crit rate buff for your party when she casts her burst. Kaeya's elemental skill, Frostgnaw, deals cryo damage in a cone in front of him. Rosaria's elemental skill, Ravaging Confession, allows her to teleport a short distance forward, sometimes to the opposite end of an enemy, and then slash twice for cryo damage. Both of these skills have a 6-second cooldown. The main differences are that Rosaria's skill does slightly more damage per level than Kaeya's, and that Kaeya's skill has a slightly shorter animation. Kaeya's elemental burst, Glacial Waltz, summons 3 icicles that orbit him. These deal a fair amount of damage and can hit very rapidly. Rosaria's elemental burst, Rites of Termination, throws a spear on the ground at her location that pulses cryo damage around it every 2 seconds. Both of their bursts have the same cost, cooldown, and base duration. The main difference is that Rosaria's burst is stationary, where Kaeya's follows your active character. Rosaria's burst also does a fair bit more damage per hit, but hits much less frequently. Another major difference is each character's second constellation. Kaeya's second constellation increases his burst duration from 8 seconds to up to 15 seconds in situations where enemies can be killed rapidly. Rosaria's second constellation straight up increases the duration from 8 seconds to 12 seconds. Another thing I want to mention here is each character's built-in crit rate mechanic. Rosaria's first ascension talent gives her a 12% crit rate buff when she hits a target in the back with her elemental skill. Kaeya's equivalent of this is his first constellation, which gives him a 15% crit rate buff when attacking cryo-affected targets. Both characters have a lot of main DPS potential, but I think that Kaeya is a little better as a main DPS for freeze teams. Their main functions as sub DPS come from their elemental bursts. Because of Kaeya's burst dealing more rapid cryo damage, I think that he is a bit better in melt teams, where you're triggering melt on a pyro carry. Rosaria would be better in melt teams when she is the one triggering reverse melt with her burst due to its less frequent but higher damage takes. IWinToLose has a fantastic video on how to trigger reverse melts as Rosaria, and I highly recommend checking it out. There's a link to that video in the description below. For both characters as main DPS in freeze teams, you should prioritize leveling your basic attacks, then elemental burst, and then elemental skill. As main DPS in melt teams, you should prioritize your elemental burst, then basic attacks, and then elemental skill. As sub DPS, you should prioritize your elemental burst above the rest, followed by your elemental skill, and then you don't really need to level your basic attacks for them as sub DPS. The first team type that I want to cover is freeze teams, with Kaeya or Rosaria as your main DPS, and Xingqiu and Chongyun as sub DPS. You can permanently freeze most enemies. With a combination of Xingqiu's elemental burst and Chongyun's elemental skill, allows you to apply both hydro and cryos simultaneously on basic attacks. Even when Xingqiu's burst isn't up, the water blades from his elemental skill can also apply hydro to targets by bumping into them. You might think that the damage output here could be lackluster because you aren't getting a damage bonus from any elemental reactions. But keep in mind that you get a free 55 to 70% crit rate, allowing you to have much higher damage stats. And since the enemies aren't moving any, you get to freely DPS them as hard as you can. This makes most non-boss content a joke, and it's very strong in the Spiral Abyss. For the fourth slot, you definitely want a support. I would recommend a character who can increase your team's damage and also provide healing or shielding. Jean and Zhongli are great examples of this. Barbara is also a great free-to-play option here, not just for her healing, but because her elemental skill can apply hydro on contact, just like Xingqiu's. This can be used to fill any downtime that Xingqiu's hydro applications may have. You could run Kaeya or Rosaria as the main DPS in a reverse melt team. This team would function around pyro applications from Xiangling's elemental burst and then triggering reverse melt with Kaeya and Rosaria's skills and burst for maximum damage. For the third and fourth slots, I would recommend Chongyun for extra cryo damage on basic attacks and Bennett for pyro resonance and the huge damage increase when his burst is up. You could also run any animo or shielding supports here if you would prefer them. I don't really recommend this right now because Xiangling is the only pyro sub DPS character in the game, and she doesn't have very rapid pyro applications. Hopefully we'll get a new sub DPS pyro character soon to make this type of team more viable. Kaeya and Rosaria can also be very good cryo sub DPS options. Both characters can apply cryo to targets while off field, but Kaeya is a bit better at this than Rosaria. For this type of team, you would want Diluc, Hu Tao, Klee, or Yanfei as your main DPS. For the second slot, you would want Kaeya or Rosaria, but you could actually run both of them here if you want. Then you could run Bennett, a shield support, or an animo support. Another option for melt teams is to pair Kaeya or Rosaria with Xiangling again. Here, you would actually play Xiangling as an off-field main DPS, where you're actively applying cryo to a target and triggering melt with Xiangling's burst. Chongyun would be very useful on this team for extra cryo applications. And for the last slot, I would recommend Bennett here, but any support with healing or shielding and a way to increase your team's damage would work. I won't be doing a whole tier list of all the weapons, and instead, I'll just be covering a few weapons of both 4-star and 5-star rarity for each playstyle. First, I'll go over Kaeya's weapons in a freeze team. The best weapon here is the Summit Shaper. It has really high base attack, scaling attack percent, and an effect that gives you even more attack percent. It gives an insane amount of attack. Mistsplitter Reforged is going to be really good for him. It has the highest base attack of swords and has scaling crit damage. It also has an effect that amplifies elemental damage. It's a bit too soon for me to say for sure, but I think this sword will outperform the Summit Shaper. The best 4-star for Freeze Kaeya is the Blackcliff Longsword. It has good base attack and it has scaling crit damage, which is very useful for him. It also has an effect that gives a huge stacking attack buff when enemies are defeated. Then we have the Flute, which has scaling attack percent, and its effect can actually pump out a lot of damage because you can build it up rapidly on the immobile enemies. For Rosaria's weapons in a freeze team, we start off with the Staff of Homa, which has high base attack, scaling crit damage, and an effect that increases HP and gives attack percent that scales off of HP. Then we have the Vortex Vanquisher, which is the spear equivalent of the Summit Shaper. It has high base attack, scaling attack percent, and an effect that gives even more attack percent. Again, it's an insane amount of attack. For the 4 stars, the best option is the Black Cliff Pole. It has good base attack, scaling crit damage, and a stacking effect that gives attack percent when enemies are defeated. Then we have the Lithic Spear, which has the highest base attack of 4-star spears. It also has scaling attack percent, and its effect gives additional attack percent and crit rate based on the amount of Liyue characters in your party. With Xingqiu and Chongyun, you will always have at least 2 stacks, making it very strong. Next are Kaeya's weapons, where he's a sub DPS. The best weapon, and only 5-star here, is the Skyward Blade for its high base damage, scaling energy recharge, and free crit rate on the weapon effect. The 4-star event weapon, Festering Desire, is very strong for its energy recharge and increased elemental skill damage on its effect. Then we have the Sacrificial Sword, which also has energy recharge, and it has the unique effect to be able to reset the cooldown of elemental skills, allowing you to generate even more energy. Lastly, the Favonius Sword, which has a low base damage, but once again has scaling energy recharge. Its effect also allows you to occasionally gain extra energy on critical hits. Then we have Rosaria's sub DPS weapons. The best weapon here is the Primordial Jade Wing Spear. It has the highest base damage of spears. The scaling crit rate is great for Rosaria's capability as a crit battery, and its effect gives you a ton of attack percent. Next is the Staff of Homa again, which has high base attack, scaling crit damage, and an effect that increases HP and gives attack percent that scales off of HP. This is especially good if you're triggering Reverse Melt on her burst. For the 4 stars, we have the Deathmatch from the Battle Pass. It has fairly low base attack, but it has scaling crit rate and an effect that gives a ton of attack percent. Then we have the Black Cliff Pole, which has good base attack and scaling crit damage. This is a good 4-star alternative to the Staff of Homa, and it's useful for reverse melting. This concludes my guide on Kaeya and Rosaria together. I hope everyone was able to learn something about this cold-hearted duo. I haven't decided what my next video will be about yet, but it might be Inazuma related, so be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss it. Also be sure to leave a like and a comment. I interact with my comment section regularly, and I'm very open to feedback and discussions. I stream Genshin every Saturday at twitch.tv/FoolOffense. The week of Inazuma's release, I'll be streaming every day, and then after that, I'll go back to my weekly Saturday streams. I also have a Discord that everyone is welcome to join. Come leave feedback and meet other Genshin gamers who want to learn in-depth character building. There are links to both of those in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you all in Inazuma.